Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thank you for joining us for this seventh in the series of Folks Open Consultation Mondays. It's good to see you. Thanks for being with us again, or if you come for the first time, we hope you enjoyed it. You enjoyed. And the topic changes each time, as you know. I'm Georgios Kostakos, the Executive Director of FOX, the Foundation for Global Governance Sustainability. We try to cover timely topical issues of global affairs, having in mind the improvement of the function of the global system, of multilateralism of the United Nations, a new narrative for globalization that's inclusive, citizenship, active citizenship at the global level of all people, and of course, prosperity in a sustainable and resilient way. Very briefly to tell you what we stand for. And this topic came up as we see what is happening with big powers that when the elephants, I don't know, they're not making love or they're fighting each other or whatever, the grass and the rest of the world pays for it. So we see it happening again more clearly perhaps than before. It's not that it was an ideal world before, but lately it has become even worse. And we want to see who are the actors who can really play a catalytic role in changing this spiral downwards, the spiral towards further conflict and destruction. So like many others, we thought of the middle powers, and our definition of middle powers is those quite vague, those countries that have a combination of elements from population to resources to political will to diplomatic capabilities to be able to influence global outcomes, right? On their own, or more often perhaps in cooperation with others. They are not big enough to claim hegemony. They are not too small to want to follow some others, but they can generate more or less autonomous and rational foreign policies, and they can pursue them, hopefully in alignment with others who are similarly thinking and with principles, with values, because their well-being, their people's well-being, depends on values, depends on reciprocity, since they cannot dominate the system, right? If you want to think of it rationally, or also because they do believe in those values. So very briefly, I will introduce also the background paper that we have shared with you and which was presented in South Africa a couple of weeks ago at a meeting of the Africa Think Tank Dialogue there, uh, which was an opportunity again to test some of these thoughts and hypotheses, and then we can get started with the discussion. Of course, we are recorded. It's an open meeting. It's an open consultation. So if you don't want to be recorded saying something, don't say it. But I hope there is, certainly from us, there is full freedom of speech as long as we maintain a decent language and goodwill. And afterwards, you can find both the video recording, but also a summary that we are doing electronically through AI. And we will check it, of course. You will find them both on the Fox website and our YouTube channel and on Facebook, because now it's webcast live on Facebook. So yeah, again, what we mean by this middle powers, it could be from Brazil and Mexico and South Africa to Norway and Singapore, which are very different in terms of population. But if you combine without taking too strict a proportion of what percentage of importance you put on money, resources available, or population, or area that they cover, etc., you can say that they're middle powers because they have proven in the past that they can have an influence, and they are interested to really maintain stability in the system. Um, those powers, therefore, we would expect them to be the bridge builders, to be the ones that try to find solutions to conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war or the Middle East war, or Sudan and Myanmar and other places. We would expect them also to help accelerate the progress towards the SDGs. We would expect them to work for disarmament rather than for armament, to use those limited resources of the earth and of the countries towards more positive outcomes for well-being and sustainability and resilience. So those are the elements that we expect to see. Countries that respect also the international law, that respect the treaties they have signed, and they follow also customary law. And they also work with civil society. We have also the citizens of the world as an agent by itself, in our various formations and in our various with our various backgrounds. Still, we think that this group of countries working together with the international public opinion of sorts through civil society, they could really be a powerful actor. And hopefully working with the United Nations, at least the Secretariat, that tries also to express the human common interest despite its own shortcomings. So, yeah, we would hope to see some kind of an alliance of these forces in the future, and we want to encourage that. So, a few more things about this background paper that I told you. We see, therefore, that these states could act as mediators, as I said before, in conflicts and bridge builders, uh, take preventive action to avoid the involvement of big powers, for example, by doing fact-finding in cases of disagreements, who did this, who did that, etc., advancing the culture of peace and pushing for nuclear and conventional disarmament, rethinking the economy. That's a big issue. We see the economy collapsing now, at least the big crisis in the financial sector. How can we rethink the economy to reallocate resources for the SDGs and make it work for the majority of people and not just for the oligarchs around the world and the countries that want to manipulate their currencies, the stock exchange, etc. Support for greater transparency and accountability by multilateral institutions, but also using those institutions like the United Nations to get broadly acceptable outcomes. Concrete proposals for improving these institutions, from Security Council reform to other ways of making them work better. As I said before, respect for international law in their own actions and for the others, insisting that the others also, and if they don't, they take them to the courts, to the ICJ, to the ICC, etc., and leading by example, which is very, very important, not to have a difference between theory and practice. So these countries, without necessarily naming them all or having some vagueness about the composition of this group, if they worked as a group or some of them together, they could really influence the majority of in the General Assembly of the UN. They could influence the majority of countries that are non-permanent members of the Security Council. They would have the moral authority to take initiatives together with the Secretary General or otherwise. They cut across North and South. They cut across groups like the G7, the G20, the G77, the BRICS. They're everywhere. And that's good because they can also play this bridging role, as I said. And finally, what's in it for them? Of course, they also create goodwill towards them, towards their political positions, their trade, and other things. They create a constructive climate that also benefits them. And of course, even if we have a new category, for example, for non-permanent members of the Security Council who serve longer term, these countries would be expected to be elected on those seats. There are limitations, there are problems, inconsistencies everywhere, the countries themselves. But yeah, if we see the bright side of things and if there is an agreement to work in that direction, we think that they will be a very positive influence. And that's all from me. And please, you can raise your electronic hand. If you cannot, you can raise your real hand and hopefully we'll see it. And let's get the discussion started with Henk Jan from New York. Yes.
I can also, yes, there we go. Thanks, Georgios. Very interesting. I do agree that this is a really important group of countries. But I'm a little bit troubled by a couple of aspects of the way you present it. First, I do think that there's not really a clear definition, and I think you mix a couple of different things together, and so partly it's wishful thinking in terms of, these are the groups the criteria that you would like this group to have, like being democratic or not being involved in wars or things like that, rather than having a really objective criteria. That I do think that you have some of the elements there, like punching above its weight, and things like that. Um, the second thing is also that it is a very strange group. You I don't think European Union is part of it. I mean, Europe is been, the center for power way too long, and they're not a middle power. They are, still a really significant power, relatively declining. I would definitely say. But I do think it's odd to include the European Union in there. I would also exclude smaller countries. I mean, you have Barbados there. There are definitely a lot of little countries at the UN that punch far above its weight. There's no doubt about it. Barbados is maybe one of them. Liechtenstein with its veto initiative is another one. But I wouldn't call them middle powers. I would also include India, for example, there, which you explicitly exclude, which I think is a little odd. To do. But I think you need to come to a much more clearer set of definitions that are much more objective, rather than normative and aspirational. That leads to a much smaller group of countries that are perhaps excluding also some of the more traditional powers that are have been ruling the world for millennia. So that's where I would come down. So that giving my last comments also exclude, of course, Germany, Japan, etc. But I think you're onto something important, that there is this middle group of powers that are gaining a lot of weight in multilateralism and could be a potential force for saving the multilateral system, including the UN, because that's the platform where they like to exercise their power, their gaining power. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you, and for the fair criticism or concerns or thinking loud. Yes, I would not like to respond directly. I have some responses, but I'm also concerned about most of these things. Let's see what the others think, and let's take it again. I'll also respond eventually. Who else would like to contribute their thinking? Ken had obviously read the whole list, not only what I said now, but the background document, so he saw more things there that I had said.
Okay.
Yes, Suki Hasagawa from Japan. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, George. Yeah, thanks, Hank Jan, Mr. Brinken. I'd like to just follow up on that Mr. Brinken's comment, but on that last part at the end, what he said, that in fact he is interested in countries that can make an influence on saving the UN system or multilateralism and so forth. I think perhaps we can focus on not so much of categorizing one country is small or big or medium or not, but I like to see that this group of countries that can make a difference in sustaining multilateralism centered around the UN system. So these countries can be not static, or we don't have to debate certain countries in or out. For example, you mentioned yourself Brazil. From my experience in reporting to the Security Council 4 or 5 times and engaged in the backroom discussion, Brazil certainly plays a role, and it can be constructive very much. And whether you call Brazil small or medium, or can be a large country, to me, that's fine, whatever you say so. But I like to see the countries such as Brazil to be in this process of consultation on making the decisions by the Security Council. So my interest is players who would, as you both said, can influence the deliberation of the Security Council. And I noticed, maybe I'm not right, but I remember Malta and the UAE, they played a significant role in E10 resolution on humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, I think a year ago or not. Now you call it Malta is a tiny country, but what I like to see is the group of countries that can make a difference, and I like to perhaps discuss with you or learn from you how to enable that institutionally. And I like to zero in on the Security Council reform that all countries, G4, AU, L69, and whatever the group you talk about, who have been involved in IGN since 2009, they have come to common understanding. They don't want to say the consensus or agreed position. But if you look at what they are saying and put it in even AI or whatever computation, they all now come to agree that the Security Council should be expanded, enlarged by 10 to 11. They agreed. What they haven't agreed is whether it should consist of a permanent member and a non-permanent member. And they have some discussions as from which regions and so forth. It's okay. But I think if you can concentrate on how to form that group of 10 that can be in the Security Council and influence the G5 permanent fives, restrain them. Can we maybe discuss it, or can I hear from you how we can do so?
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, very important, the Security Council connection. And if we can focus on finding 10 then of these middle powers who would deserve also to be on the Security Council, if it is expanded by 10 or 11 would be great. I was not very specific before because I thought they would self-select themselves or de facto. But anyway, we have also Tula Dlamini. Please, if you want to introduce also yourself. The other colleagues were former UN colleagues that I know them. Of course, everybody has, if possible, to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Yes, no, I'm a scholar, but I work for a bank, one of the 4 big banks in South Africa. My question is not related to the work that I do, but I really appreciate the picture that you've painted and also the input from the last speaker. I just wanted to find out from everyone in the team today, where they would place countries like South Africa, I mean, at the moment, chairing the G20 with the potential to influence the countries that will be participating. And also the African Union, considering that it's representing nearly 54, 55 countries. What kind of leverage do these networks put on the table in respect of the Security Council? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And South Africa is a very special case. I was there, as I told you before, for this discussion of the Africa Think Tank Dialogue, and our partners, the Inclusive Society Institute in Cape Town, hosted the discussion. And it was, of course, South Africa is a special place in our hearts with Mandela, the transition from apartheid, his moral authority is big, is as everybody was saying there, the industrialized country in Africa, probably. So it has a lot going for it. When you go to Security Council reform, there has been a consensus within the African Union that there'll be 2 seats, there should be 2 seats for permanent members from Africa. But of course, there the consensus stops whether it will be South Africa and Nigeria, South Africa and Egypt. Usually South Africa is usually one of the 2, but not necessarily, right? And it is how South Africa plays its cards, whether we want to put emphasis on new permanent members or not. And Dr. Hasegawa has written a lot about this. He has thought about this a lot. And even for countries like Japan, Germany, Brazil, and India, who are the G4 who wanted to be permanent members, we think that maybe the time is past now for any of those to demand such a privileged position when we see that the veto is not allowing decisions to be made on the Security Council. We don't want to have additional vetoes, additional powers that consider themselves permanently hegemonic, and have a more constructive role through another kind of membership in the Council, and also different kind of attitude towards multilateralism. So this is a very initial response for South Africa, which is really a special, in a good way, special case, I would think. But let's see also what the others think. Anybody else who would like to contribute at this stage? Yes, Kerstin Leitner, also a former UN colleague, member of the Peacemaking Reflection Group, and speaking from Germany, I suppose.
Yes, thank you. I would like to take us back a step, because I mean, what does it mean to be a big power? What does it mean to be a middle power? What does it mean to be a small power? Basically, it's a concept of the 19th century coming out of European politics. And a big power is largely a power that also enjoys certain privileges. It's particularly clear that that can be quite a discrepancy to the real power that the country has in the case of Russia. Russia, when you look at it, I mean, by many indicators, is not more than a middle power. And yet it plays and attempts to play to be a big power. I think what we're seeing today in the 21st century, we have close to 200 countries. We have a UN community that has basically charted a course for sustainable development. And we have a number of countries who do not necessarily object to it, but only are very lukewarm in their support. And then, of course, we do have the countries that object to it. So I guess what really will count in future is which countries form alliances to get us from our current resource-depleting economic way of operating to sustainable forms of economic operations. And I think there, whether then that's a middle power that takes the lead, or a small power, I don't think that's so much the deciding factor. The deciding factor is that they capture the attention of the world community. Because I think what we're all suffering from at this point is that somebody like Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin absolutely monopolizes our attention. And when UNCTAD sort of very quietly and timidly raises its voice and says, well, but 80% of world trade is still being done according to the established rules and regulations. Well, that should be the news, and then there should be a follow-up discussion. So how are countries actually affected by what Mr. Trump has now introduced? And it could well be that it will turn out, I don't want to say it's marginal, but it may be much less important than the media make it out to be. So what I would like to suggest is that we have to link it to the substance of it. And I mean, when we talk about reconstituting the Security Council, that is in fact a substantive move in the sense that we want a council that indeed is the custodian of international peace and stability. I mean, that's what we are after. We are not after getting rid of the big powers. We are trying to get rid of powers that are behaving irresponsibly with regard to the mandate that they have. That I think that's sort of the dividing line. And in many ways, I mean, this is a very healthy development. It's a very good development. When small countries like Liechtenstein or Barbados punch above their weight, that's wonderful. But why is that so? Because they are clearly, I mean, addressing the issues that need addressing. And while, I mean, people like Trump and Putin address issues that don't need attention and don't need addressing. On the contrary, they are of the past, and we have to find ways to move on and to get to policies that and international trade and investment that is truly focused on sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joy,
Thank you, Kirsten.
I think since Kirsten said so well, may I just follow up on what she said?
Please.
I think
Yes.
I agree with her very much. I think we have to look at the substance, but also the leadership. And here, I think we have to distinguish between the personal desire of certain leaders to be on the limelight. I think we have to distinguish between what Trump is trying to be the champion and what the Putin is. I think, in a nutshell, I agree that we have to have the Security Council or United Nations basically to be governed or to be participated by 5 major powers. And the strength of Putin is not how he sort of maneuvers, but I think his strength is his willingness to use nuclear weapons. I think that's a danger. It's a real danger, but it constitutes power. The Western powers, the United States and others, they say they are not going to use it. In Sun Tzu's Art of War, I mean, Americans and the Europeans are failing lesson number 1 in the Art of War. Don't show your intent, but also show how you can destroy the world. That's what Putin is saying. And I think that's what even Trump is not willing to do so. Now, what I'm saying is that let's combine the nation's strength and personal leadership. But in the long run, I like to see the Security Council reformed and it can be sustained for the next, not 20, 30 years. By the time that the Security Council has the 100th anniversary. But I think we can see the system that can endure into the next century, 80 years, 100 years. And I am presenting that. And I like to respond to Tura, the things. Look, Africans, I think your grievance is legitimate, but I think you have to be also realistic in realizing what constitutes power. Africans, for the moment, you don't have that power unless you become one, and which you cannot. So I may see the Nigeria or South Africa may become as powerful as other countries per se, but I don't see it next 30 years or 30 years, maybe in the 50 years or so. But I have been to Egypt so many times, and they claim what the South Africa claims, and so let's concentrate on what the frame we can make that can in fact influence the current G5, the permanent members. They will never, let's not just forget about it. We can restrain the use of veto power. Look, since 1945, they have been using veto powers left and right, beating each other. And they will not stop that to keep their power, and we have to find a way to transform that system. And with George's permission, I just like to introduce you how I propose to do. First, African countries, you have to be one and united. And unless you say that the South Africa or Nigeria or Egypt or Kenya or Ethiopia should be the permanent, means that the other African countries cannot be permanent, and it's impossible. So let's have African Union has 2 permanent seats as an African Union, and you rotate among you. Nigeria can use 2 years, and South Africa can use 2 years, and the next Egypt and so forth. Or among you, you agree, okay, Nigeria should be there for the next 5 years or 10 years, And then I think if we can have 10 seats that can be occupied by either the nation state or regional organizations such as AU or EU. EU can have 2. Now, according to G4, they want one more permanent seat for Germany, but it's a non-starter. And the same with Japan. So not to go too long, but that's one step. And the second step is in 2045. Let's use the Article 109, and we should convert the permanent 5 seats into a 10-year or 20-year electable seats. Give them veto power, but if they have to be elected, they will start behaving. Election democracy is soft, but it's strong once it's go in, because you have to be elected. And come 2045, we have a 5 10-year seats, and let the member states decide whether it should be United States continued and Russia, and I don't care France if everybody says France is great, but let the countries decide 5 seats. wherever they come, China or India or Brazil be included, and let them stay there for 10 years. And then let's have a 5-year renewable seats. That would include Turkey, Iran, Brazil, or other major powers, 10 major middle powers. And we have 10 more 2-year seats. And I think then we will have a democracy on a global basis. And that's what the Boutros Ghali said. And he was fired by the Americans for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation also of the proposal for the reform of the Security Council that you will also present at the meeting of the IGN. With, thank you. With the civil society, the government.
Frank disagrees 100%. Hi, Frank.
Well, hear what he says. He's the third one after Lerato, who is...
yeah, I am the other in the UNB.
No, we disagree among ourselves very constructively, I see, and we have already taken it to breaking new ground here. So it's very nice disagreements that we're having. Lerato from the younger generation of South Africans, is it? Lerato.
Hi, Giorgio. Sorry, I hope everyone can hear me. I'm sorry, I'm suffering from a bit of flu. I think before one of the conversations, perhaps before we want to talk about allocating seats to the Security Council or whom we think should be getting a seat or how we're going to redesign it, I think we need to decide what do we want it to do moving forward. That it isn't currently able to achieve right now. I disagree with the idea that that we're going to have to get 2 seats as for to represent a whole continent of the world's most populated continent. I don't think 2 seats may be enough. I think you may need 5 for an entire continent this side, and how you're going to
we have it according to new formula. You have it according to this addition of 10 and
if
5.
you allow us, yes, this margin. We already have 2 South African seats in the 2-year the 2-year term.
Non-permanent, yeah. Yes. But
we'll have another 2 for the other 10, plus in the permanent.
I'm talking about having 5 permanent altogether, and that would be, excuse me, 1 per region. So North, East, Central, South, and West, and West Africa. I think also a lot of the reformations, I mean, I agree with what Kirsten and what Mr. Hashigawa is saying, but unfortunately, the numbers aren't on the Western and Northern Europe side anymore. Demographically speaking, Africa is the largest voting shareholding member of the United Nations General Assembly. And this is now excluding the remainder of the Global South countries. So the quality and the type of reforms that we want to see, may not really be an issue of, you don't want to get rid of the current 5, leading UNSC members. Well, it depends on what your experience with them being in power and what them exercising and yielding power has been. And for the majority of the African continent and the majority of Global South members, it has not been a pleasant experience. Not only within the UNSC, but then on the outlier and peripheral UN institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. But fine, I'm sort of digressing, and that's a different conversation. But I think a conversation that we really do need to have again is, what do we want the UN Security Council to do moving forward that we feel is not currently being done? I think that's an important conversation to be had.
Thank you, Lerato. Very fair. Of course, who does this and who brings common sense to these arrangements? It's a big question because there is no power above the powers with their interests. So we're trying to harness, moral authority and other things to at least move things in the right direction. You're right, population-wise, there have been major shifts. And Africa has 55 out of the 193 members of the General Assembly of the UN, right? So, I mean, Africa is more than a fourth of the world's countries and all that. Many, many things going for it, a youthful population and hopefully a bright future. So yeah, we'll take all this into account, but how to do it is also major, major question, challenge. Ingrid Lehmann, also from former UN colleagues, with a lot of experience.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm calling from Austria. I really don't know how shall we say, how productive it is to focus on the UN Security Council reform at this stage. We've been doing it for the last 40, 50 years, and haven't really made terribly much progress, I'm afraid. There are also other ways, I think, of looking at the way middle powers, and this is our topic today, not the Security Council, right, can make their roles and their significance more felt in international organizations and outside international organizations. We also don't only have to focus on the UN here. I'd like to stress what our South African friend, the first speaker, said, the role of regional powers. And that has the advantage of also being a chapter of the United Nations Charter, which I don't think has been totally explored, or enough explored, maybe by us or by others recently. And it's the AU, it's the EU, the OSCE, and various organizations in Asia that are moving closer together. And they allow middle powers to not only express themselves, but build the kind of alliances that I think Kerstin Leitner pointed out we need to get things done outside of this madness that we see between Putin and Trump and a few others. I really regret, Joyce, you sort of exclude the EU per se. Right now, when you live in Europe, it's really the only thing there is. Huh? And if you can manage, the one or two countries, which I don't have to name now, who try to sort of block major action by the EU, and I think there are ways of sort of keeping them out of the main decision making. I'm talking about Hungary and one other country. Fortunately, not Austria, because it managed to find a government that cooperates within the EU. So whatever those regional organizations are that can form the alliances that already exist, I think have to be strengthened and not weakened. And if you count the number of people living in Europe, it's still pretty significant, right? What is it, 400 million right now? It's not just to be sort of written off as have-beens and no longers and not having any economic impact. So I feel a little bit disappointed by that part of the discussion.
Thank you, Ingrid. If you read the whole background paper, the EU is there with a question mark as a middle power by itself. If it wants to act in unison and influence as European Union another pole, a distinct pole, and of course, several countries within it which could play that role. It could be at the same time, as you said, the regional coalitions perhaps empower also powers within them to play that role. It's by no way excluded, the European Union. The thing is, 450, I think, million people, it's very important, much less though in terms of population, exactly than China or India or Africa now rising together. But of course, in terms of per capita income or per capita climate contributions, etc., much more. So yeah, it's a discussion that doesn't exclude anybody. Yeah, I think we should. Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. And Frank.
Yes. Hello. My apologies for missing the first 10 or 15 minutes. I had just come out of a meeting with Bertie Ahern, the former Irish Prime Minister, who is a co-chair of the Interaction Council, and they will have a meeting shortly in Dublin, former presidents and prime ministers, which coincides or rather overlaps with our PRG retreat, but I will make the first evening of it, and he has asked me to do so. You will have seen me perhaps earlier driving through the streets of Dublin, and I was trying to, I wasn't able to interact, but I was able to listen very closely to Suki's presentation on the Security Council reform, which I fully agree with by and large. I think we do sometimes perhaps attach a little bit too much credibility, if you wish, to Putin's nuclear saber rattling. There isn't any way he could actually engage it without catastrophic consequences for Russia, let alone Europe and the United States and others. And I think they realize that. In fact, the nuclear expenditures are such an extraordinary waste of human resources and financial resources at a time when the planet is facing so many other challenges, that I would like to come to another issue than the Security Council reform, but which is equally important, and that is the recent denunciation by the United States in the General Assembly of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think this is an area around which middle powers and others must really unite to preserve this global consensus that we have hitherto had on where the world needs to be going in terms of challenges. So therefore, the SDGs very much on Agenda 2030. Now, I appreciate very much what Ingrid Lehmann has said aus Österreich about the importance of regional organizations and regional, if you wish, coalitions or alliances, as Kirsten had also put it. I think it's extremely important because, to quote none other than the Americans themselves, e pluribus unum, out of the many, we can make one solid force. And I think this gets me to the one other thing which we face, which is the ostensible threat or certainly assault on multilateralism, of which the United Nations is the premier institution, that it is not much of a secret when you listen to people like Elon Musk that, you know, America should get out of the UN and the UN should get out of America and maybe just dissolve into oblivion. This should be taken seriously. And when you think of what is happening to the domestic institutions in the United States, both in terms of the effectiveness of the separation of powers, but also delivery of services to people, whether you're talking of social welfare, health services, and all the rest of that, the Doge, for want of a better word, drive to efficiency. Well, we all like to see things efficient. Now there's a Doge UN. And I was briefing Bertie Ahern about this because he wasn't really so much aware of it. This Doge UN seems to me, as I said to him, to be a very smart stealing of the thunder of the likes of Elon Musk, in fact, to support the UN, because if you look at their website, they do talk about that, but not without substantial reform, which I think we all agree the UN needs. So the question is, how can we engage with Doge UN to preserve multilateralism, to preserve the infrastructure of institutions that we have, epitomized most of all by the United Nations, and to ensure that the reforms that the UN needs actually serve the member states and the collectivity of member states, not just the individuals, but all of us together as we move forward into the rest of the 21st century. So that's what I would hope to see. I also mentioned with him the alleged secret confidential memo which Secretary of Defense of the United States, Hegseth, allegedly sent to the Pentagon, which was revealed, I believe, a few days ago in the Washington Post, that would see the US switch more of its focus from the rest of the world to China and the almost inevitability of conflict with China, and divert attention from Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East, and other theaters of conflict. This is serious because that memo mentions the article in the Washington Post, Greenland, and the importance of America preparing for military action in the Americas, the old Monroe Doctrine coming back, to threaten, sovereignty of Denmark, sovereignty within the context of the self-determination of the people of Greenland, and indeed Panama and Cape Horn, of all things, down south. So this has to be taken very seriously. And this is why I think the reform of the Security Council is absolutely imperative, but not likely to happen very soon. So we need to keep that pushing that button, but at the same time, through the General Assembly, try our utmost to preserve the other elements of collective intent, which have been encapsulated way back in the Millennium Declaration, the MDGs, now the SDGs and Agenda 2030. So I think we need to have that more comprehensive focus on what needs to happen. And the role of the middle powers is fundamental there, because they are the ones who ultimately will get the majorities to prevail in the General Assembly and hopefully get some sort of a consensus to emerge at the level of the Security Council. Thank you, Yorgos.
Thank you, Frank. And it's good that the Interaction Council, or these interactions hopefully will lead to something, some momentum to be created. And also what you said now about the Dodge UN, there is a discussion also in the chat. Some people don't trust the initiative, and I don't know if they trust Jeremic or not, but they talk about the person who is behind it or in front of it, the former president of the General Assembly and foreign minister of Serbia, Vuk Jeremic. So we can continue that discussion too. The intentions, I would say, though, as we should not focus too much only on Security Council reform, but we should introduce the thinking that will lead eventually to something happening. We should not also focus on reforming the UN, especially the Secretariat. When it becomes like cutting fat from the Secretariat, okay, cut the whole department maybe, or half of it. It misdirects from the issues that I think Kerstin and others talked about, which is, and you, Frank, the 2030 agenda, for example, right? Or the substance, which is policy of member states with the role of the Secretariat, but it's not about only how many P4s you can have in a department. And that's really not very productive.
Can I just add a comment?
Yes, please.
Because I've just had a glance at the comments that have been made about Doge. I am also skeptical, but to some extent. But I know Vuk Jeremic for the better part of 25 years personally, ever since he walked into my office in Belgrade and told me what the UN should be doing. And I said, well, actually, we are doing that in Serbia and Montenegro. And he later on became the foreign minister and then the president of the GA. Vuk and I know each other quite well. We spoke recently in Baku, and he will be in touch with me again because he's just after visiting China and other places. From what I know of him, he is quite committed to multilateralism. He helped establish, with the help of Jeff Sachs and others, the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development in Belgrade, which actually was not unrelated to a concept of a commission, which I had shared with Jeff shortly before then. So I think, I'm not saying we should trust Doge UN, but I think we should try to engage and influence the directions that they might be thinking of, as well as in our other fora that we have. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. If he's learning French and he's going to China, etc., he wants to become Secretary General. Major indications. So who is coming next? Any other comment?
On that, before I go,
it's okay. Yes, it's getting late in Japan. Yes, please.
Yeah, that's right. Can I ask you, Frank, that on this SDGs, I think you are so right that somebody has to stand up and say, "Look, this matters." Now, elders can say so, but also I think national leaders such as Modi of India. Say, look, for country, India is as big as whole of Africa, and it counts, and they are making a progress, and that some leaders. I mean, to me, the leadership counts for that matter. Now, second thing, this is more I like to ask you your views because we are so intrigued. Trump saying that they have to pay more attention to Asia, but he's giving double signals, two signals. On the one side, putting a lot of tariffs and everything, and China is stealing everything to become an economic great power, and we have to stop it. That's his one message. But at the same time, he wants to meet with Xi Jinping. You know, he's sending messages right and left and see, please come to Florida, Mar-a-Lago, and have another session and so forth. And then he may change his positions, and that concerns us Japanese. Do you know why? Because Americans are now pushing. I think also occurs in Germany too, but they are pushing Japan to be armed. And this Secretary of Defense, Segres, he was here 2 days ago, and he was saying that, look, Japan, you have to be frontline in defending against Chinese aggression to Taiwan and so forth. You know, the Americans are now putting Japan really to be ready to fight. I mean, militarily. And this is a danger, you see, because as far as we see it, the Chinese are, at China, they think in terms of 50, 100 years, 200 years. They're not saying that they will take over Taiwan right away militarily. Although Americans and even Japanese saying that every indication is there. But they do so if Taiwan is induced by United States to become independent nation. You see, that Chinese has said time and again, look, we can't allow that. So tell me from your side, what do you see in Trump? What does he want in China, in Asia? He says, forget about Europe. We will go to face the China, but I get two different signals. We don't know. He will become a friend with China. You see what I mean? How do you see it? Maybe you see it in a different way.
Is this question directed towards, you said, Suki?
Yeah, Frank, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit two nails on the head there, and both very important. I'd like to just bring them together, which is the whole question of security defense of many different theaters and the SDGs, because what we are facing, as you know, is the decline of ODA and the substantial reduction, not just because of the cancellation of USAID, but the decisions by European countries, by the EU itself, by the United Kingdom and others to reduce their budgets for ODA way below the 0.7% of GDP that OECD had committed to long ago. And this is directly affecting the ability of many developing countries to make progress. But worse than that, the tariff war that's just been declared on little countries like Lesotho, like who ever heard of Lesotho? Well, I spent 4 years there. I heard about it. And by the way, putting tariffs of over 50% on Lesotho essentially undercuts the fiscal stability of that tiny little African country and many others. So the real risk we face with this tariff war, unless we assume, as we may well do, that Trump is actually engaging in brinksmanship, bluster, threatening these things, putting them into effect, with the expectation that then there will be a rollback because of an engagement and the compromises that would be struck for new free trade, Europe, EU, whatever, and the United States, but also the third world countries or developing countries. I mean, unless we do that, we have to assume that some of these tariffs are here to stay for many of those countries. They will undercut the fiscal sustainability of these countries. They will undercut their services, their social sector, health and education, and we can expect an explosion of unrest that will lead to the toppling of governments, an increasing surge of failed states, and a wave of migration to the north, the likes of which we have never seen before. And so this ability of the United Nations to deal with failed states is so substantially reduced by what we've had to deal with in the past few years that I really do fear that this is another big challenge that we face. And that's why we have to deal very effectively with the tariff thing. And I know that right now, today in Luxembourg, the Foreign Affairs Council, the foreign ministers of the EU countries are meeting to discuss the collective response actually to the initial tariffs on steel and aluminium. But they will also have to factor in the latest wave of tariffs, and who knows what they're going to come up with. There's a lot of moderating voices there, but they will come up with something. And the hope is that it will oblige the United States to enter into some serious negotiations, not just on our own collective behalf in the EU, but also just globally, that we need to try and keep the world more or less ticking over so that it doesn't explode or implode or collapse in some catastrophic sort of way. Now, on the China-Taiwan thing, so, okay, I think Bertie Ahern asked me for my opinion, which is totally uninformed on this issue completely, but I would simply think that the Chinese can, because we also have the 9-dash line thing in the South China Sea, which is the other thing. But China generally has been very supportive of multilateralism and of the United Nations in many ways. But where Taiwan is concerned, they probably don't have to take military action to take over Taiwan. They can do it by stealth. And I think that that's probably what will happen over a medium time frame, not the short term. And so the whole question of whether there's a military threat, of course, one has to prepare perhaps to some extent, but how much you want to do this and at what cost in other areas, this is an open question, I think, that has to be addressed by the world's leaders.
Thank you very much. We will try to get also some other opinions now. James Arbuckle, he's a former UN peacekeeper, brave Canadian living in Europe now, right? And Jamie, from your perspective, how do you see things? You're still muted?
Click the mic. Okay, I did.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Perfect.
you very much for a very interesting and challenging afternoon. Like a lot of people in my business, in our business, I spent most of my working life stick handling my way around the United Nations, which was trying hard not to strangle on its vetoes. The United Nations had 5 vetoes. Imagine that the European Union has 27. So these existing organizations, international and regional, have accumulated barnacles which make it very difficult for them to take any initiative. But there is an alternative, and it's working now, and it's being widely touted by the Prime Minister of Great Britain as Coalition of the Willing.
Yes.
But the first of those is already in existence. There's a multinational brigade which is forming up in Latvia. It now has 13 nations contributing 3,500 troops. The commander and the headquarters are provided by the Canadians. And these are basically voluntary bilateral agreements between the troop contributing nations and the host nation. There is no mention of NATO, there is no mention of the United Nations, and there is nothing that anybody can do to stop them from contributing troops as within the will and the desires of the Latvian government, who naturally are quite enthusiastic about this. A similar force could be formed in Ukraine if the situation were to require that. And again, we don't have to have the barnacled traditional organizations which find it so difficult to act, because nations who wish to participate in a venture like this are free to do so within the limits of the consent of the host nation. I think this is the way ahead, and I think it's probably a pretty good workable way to go.
Thank you for that security alternative arrangements. But could I ask you, would it work? You said for Ukraine, when there is an active war, could that also happen without igniting any bigger confrontation? Latvia is okay. I suppose it's, preparing or preemptively. Yeah.
Well, they're not over there for the fun of it, and they're a well-organized, well-armed, multi-capable force. They don't include any Americans, and they haven't asked the Americans for it. I don't see any reason why nations who wish to contribute to this cannot do so, and they are doing so. The evidence is that these forces can be formed up. There may be interoperability problems, but the NATO nations have been working on that now for 70 years. And the new members of NATO probably are working very hard on interoperability. So I would be confident that a force like that could become very quickly very effective. And like I say, they are prepared to defend themselves and prepared to defend their mandate, whatever that may be. And there is a big problem. What is the mandate? Where is it going to come from? Who authorizes it? Because historically, potential troop contributing nations are usually unwilling to operate without a UN mandate.
Yeah, there. May I ask you, James? I think that militarily, it is very solid proposal, but acceptability to Putin is another thing. You know, politically, he has to accept any troops coming into that border, whatever the line they're going to draw in the Ukraine. And I think you are ruling out, but I think here the UN can play a role. If I were Secretary General, I will talk to Zelensky, and according to the UN rule of engagement, Secretary General can propose a peacekeeping force, and that can let the security this force be consisting of Africans and Asians. You know, look, I've been to Rwanda, and Rwanda can easily, they will send, Kagame will send 1,000 troops, and they are very, very devoted, you know, and the Indians and others. Now, let Secretary General should propose and the Zelensky should accept, and if Putin says no, Putin is making everybody enemy, you know? Not only the Europeans, but the Asians and the Africans. And I think African troops and Asian troops can stand there, and they may have a incident. But what would Putin gain by killing all these UN troops? And the UN has the legitimacy to go in there if Zelensky accepts it, according to UN mandate.
I would not concede that kind of initiative to Vladimir Putin, and the president of France has already told him essentially that it's none of his business what troops might be stationed in Ukraine. That would be between the troop contributors and the host nation, which is Ukraine. So he can rattle sabers all he wants. I don't think there's very much that Putin can do about international forces which might be assembling voluntarily a coalition of the willing in the Ukraine. And I think the British Prime Minister probably thinks the same thing. The question would arise shortly after a force formed, if not as the force was forming, is how would they get a mandate from the United Nations, because troop contributor nations might be unwilling. But there's a way to do it, and it's been done before. It's the Uniting for Peace resolution. So we put up a resolution of the Security Council, which would be widely vetoed. And we say, okay, fine, we move it to the General Assembly, where the matter of international peace and security is determined by the number of members present and voting. Abstentions and absences don't matter. And that's how peacekeeping was born in 1956 from a stalled Security Council to the General Assembly. So I think it could be done again.
You may be both talking for accurately for different areas, let's say Ukraine proper, and the areas which are under occupation now should probably be African or Asian troops, if you want, where the actual warring parties meet, right? But for Ukraine's protection could be another kind of deployment. But not to make it too much of a boys' talk, I think, because Anitra is waiting. Yeah, we can keep that in mind. And James, you can also write an article or together with Suki about this with options, perhaps. We have Katoikos, we have other means to advance this discussion. But because Anitra, from the She's a scientist, well known in the US and from the Club of Rome, USA. Not dealing with the UN, but dealing with the UN and the world.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would, in my small voice, suggest that for one moment, in this very interesting government focused at an international level, step back and contemplate the effect that the media, the global media, and the global private sector major industries have both on the UN and on specific countries throughout the world. And I'm thinking in terms of the International Panel on Climate Change and how the fossil fuel boys, the oil industry, has worked assiduously to take over what was a very good UN initiative and has been going on for many decades, and how the media backs them because, of course, they have paid much more to the media than any of the NGOs who are there or the national delegations, and how whatever happens within the governmental structures at an international level can be very influenced by both of these extremely wealthy groups that have no objection or objectives whatsoever, like the SDGs that have been so worked out. The media, of course, wants a lot of eyes on their advertisers, and so they will do any conflict situation that will mean that they get a lot of eyes for their advertisers, and the large corporations, big pharma, the industrial complex selling arms and military equipment, the oil industry, the steel industry, et cetera, et cetera. We could, and of course now artificial intelligence and the Silicon Valley. They have their shareholders that they're accountable to, and not the world citizens. So I think we should think about that in the very background of how the various agencies at an international level on different levels are influenced or sometimes bought off, unfortunately, such as the South Pacific Islands, by these two other factors that we haven't been talking about here, but that do have a large influence. Thank you. It's a very interesting discussion, by the way, and thank you all for enriching it.
And bringing these dimensions, of course, of the media and the private sector, very crucial actors nowadays, very influential. Yeah, really, we won't be able to complete this discussion in all its aspects in the next 15 minutes, but thank you. Let's see how we can bring it, if possible, together and with actionable ideas for the future. Peter.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, everyone. This is a great discussion. And this might take a little bit of a different tangent, but I did post my question into the chat. And I was thinking more about, I'd like to know from the experts here, what they believe the power of collectives of these middle powers could actually be effective in multilateralism. And I put the NAM, the non-alignment movement, as an example, which is quite vocal in their meetings, that they support the UN, they support the SDGs, they support a lot of multilateralism. But really, are they possibly more effective than single countries, middle powers acting on their own? And so I'd be curious to hear some of the, people's opinions on what they think the power of a collective such as the NAM could actually evoke in this space. Thank you.
The NAM still exists. Anybody can speak for it. I suppose the non-aligned movement still exists, right, on paper, but perhaps it should take another form or focus now. If anybody feels, let's say, proficient enough to tell us about this, please do. Thank you, Peter. Jan from Costa Rica. Thank you.
Hello, hello. I just wanted to add to this discussion, very interesting discussion. the transnational court system, which is an area that I have spent the last 10 years studying, and we have the Inter-American Court of Human Rights very close to where I live, and I spend quite a bit of time there. Trying to send things to the judges, to the secretariat. Everybody is trying to figure out what's going on with geopolitical economic changes today. And those of us who are doing other things but have more flexibility with our time and aren't sitting on benches for 8 to 10 hours a day like all of these judges around the world. But these are very erudite people, and the lawyers who work in these courts are very brilliant. Some of them are on my board. So I would just like for this group, where we have to think outside of the box, so important right now. Let us think of how we can build better bridges to the transnational court system. Yeah.
Thank you. I think South Africa has been trying it, or at least some countries took the Gaza issue right to the International Court of Justice, and the ICC intervened, etc. But then you see reactions to that, right? And South Africa is indeed under a lot of pressure from the US for that. But you were thinking of civil society or other ways of engaging those courts?
Well, civil society, definitely. And that's, that's what I do with my time here all over Latin America virtually. So definitely civil society. We are a human rights organization, the Visionary Ethics Foundation, celebrating 25 years this year of work. But that, I think we need to go beyond. We need to go everywhere. We need to think of creative ways. There are lots of people who are very, very committed, very concerned, and with ideas, but we're not talking to each other. So this forum is so important, and yet we need to expand, and we need to have greater ways of sharing the kind of information, for example, that I bring from this meeting. Then I go into Spanish and share it with our broad networks and with the different universities that we are engaged with. And I think this has to happen all over the world. More of us who have a little bit of extra time, who are not compressed by the institutions that we used to work for, and that we're our own bosses, so to speak, and that we can be up in the middle of the night doing things because we're strong and we continue to be committed, finding new ways to link together and to give people hope and faith. I think that it's an important time for us to do that. So thank you to all of you for your continued service, and let's find new ways to evolve ourselves and our institutions and our future. Yeah.
Thank you. And we need this alliance of people who have more time and experience, etc., and younger people, and we have quite a good crowd here in a good way, and we have to take it further. Thank you, John. We are slowly closing down. Then Frank and Victor.
Just to follow on immediately on what has been said, including by Anitra. I thank her for bringing in the whole question of the media and the corporate sector. The big problem we face with both of these being dominated by the North, as somebody has commented, is market concentration, the big fish eating the small, and before you know it, there's just a few players left, and there's less competition, there's less independence, there's less balance, in fact. So fundamental to that is tackling corruption as well, and implementing the UN Convention Against Corruption. Now, Transparency International reveals yet again that there's very, very little progress with tackling corruption. In fact, the United States in the past 10 years has declined from a rating of 75 out of 100 down to 65 over 100. So much greater problem of corruption in terms of corruption perceptions in the Corruption Perceptions Index. So that's one thing. The other thing is to see broader participation in the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which is headed up at the moment by former New Zealand Prime Minister and UNDP Administrator Helen Clark. And so this is something that needs a lot more consideration, I would say, because getting civil society, the private sector and governments to work more effectively together in the extractive industries, whether it's oil and gas or gold or aluminium or whatever, is very important, so that local communities are stakeholders, so that there's fiscal transparency where the national budget is concerned, and so that we eliminate corruption from that whole calculus. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, very negative factor, corruption, of course, and the perception of it. Let's see, and the courts have to do with it. Everything is connected, and yes, we'll manage to use it, hopefully, the whole system. Victor?
Well, greetings to everyone, first. Secondly, I think we should keep in mind that the political functions of the UN, including the peacekeeping operations, but the political side of the UN has become very, very weak. And it has weakened during the last, I would say, 10 years, quite a lot. So one of the key questions, in my opinion, is to ask ourselves and to discuss how these middle powers can bring the UN back to the center stage when it comes to political affairs, and particularly to conflict resolution, to peace operations, and these kind of things. The UN is now completely out of the main conflicts, is not considered at all. When we look at what solution can be brought to the Ukrainian crisis that was provoked, as we all know, by the Russian invasion. There is no talk about the UN, and no role is discussed for the UN when the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the President of France, for instance, meet. They don't see any role for the UN. And when they discuss this coalition of the willing, they are not thinking of going back to the Security Council and getting a mandate for such a coalition. And actually, the coalition is supposed to be on the ground one day when there will be a ceasefire. But some people think that this coalition has some other intents, including to be able to be side by side with the Ukrainian forces even before a ceasefire, and I cannot go much further on that, but you know what I mean. So there is these dimensions that have to be taken into account. I don't see in the foreseeable future any reform of the Security Council. I don't see it as possible, and I don't see the main countries, the permanent members of the Council, being prepared for that kind of reform. There will be always one of them that will veto whatever proposal is brought to the table. So the question of the reform seems to be a question that is in the long term, but not in the medium or short term, and not in the horizon. So what I really think is that is there a future for the UN as a political key player, and what kind of role can we advise some of the countries and some of the leaders that want to bring multilateralism back? What kind of role can they play, and what should be the key issues that they should put on the table? What should be the key issues that they should insist on? And that's basically what I want to mention. I appreciate some references, for instance, to the Latvia initiative, but you might keep in mind that 3,500 men and women is a very small force next to Latvia, 15 minutes by helicopter from Riga, is a major Russian base with close to 100,000 men. And they can be in Riga in 15 minutes by helicopter. And the NATO, we have done this exercise several times. The NATO will take 2 weeks to arrive in Latvia in enough strength to be able to respond to this. So coalitions are important. Coalitions of the willing, coalitions of the like-minded are important, and probably they will be a solution, but they will not bring peace, and they will not resolve the big problem of the role of the UN as the key guardian of international peace and of international values. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, as you said, hopefully middle powers will emerge as the new champions of the UN, and they will help it organize it and see how it goes. Gary Jacobs, next. Please unmute yourself. Yeah, I can.
Frank. Gary Jacobs, president of the World Academy of Art and Science. I want to thank Frank for inviting me. It's my first time in the meeting. And the discussion's been really very interesting and at a very challenging time to try to come up with practical solutions. Something has occurred to me listening to the very interesting comments is the middle powers, however we define them, have probably the greatest interest, and I think this is a voice that's been already expressed, in seeing that the multilateral institutions survive and become stronger. They have a great stake in this. The problem we have in Ukraine, and I won't go into it now, is that if we manage to get a ceasefire, it's most likely that both sides of it would use it to rearm themselves with the expectation that war is going to come again. And as much as I support the settlement of the war, it's hard to imagine that we're going to get any quick resolution through the kind of steps that are being taken. Far out ideas, supposing the group that acts as the intermediary there are the middle powers of the world. And their stake is because the war is disturbing the whole world. And the middle powers are the one people who have credibility. China doesn't have that credibility. US certainly doesn't, and even EU doesn't, according to Russia, and NATO doesn't have it for obvious reasons. But why would the middle powers do this? For the very reason that Victor was asking, because this is the one way that the middle powers could show that they have an indispensable role to play in global governance, because the big powers simply cannot do it. They simply are unable to come to terms with each other. They're competing with each other and thinking of their power. It's a wild idea, but I think that the discussion here is really touching on something. That's the role of the middle powers. They can become powerful by doing something indispensable that the world needs very now. And I think a lot of people in all over the world would think we really need that help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But of course, the middle powers feel the wrath of the big ones, like South Africa, if you, as I mentioned before, for its initiatives on Gaza, for de-dollarization of trade in some respects. It is it's accused also of confiscating land, all these things. It's really in the eye of the storm from the US.
Right now, we're all feeling the wrath of the big powers, trying to tear down everything that's been created, especially the Agenda 2030 and everything that's important for the future of humanity. Instead of talking through about the Security Council, it's time to let the rest of the world come up and say, look, we'll be the ones to stop this. If you have any sense of goodwill or real sincere intention, We'll get in the middle and ensure that this stops.
Thank you. Great. Yes, we have to rise. Paula, also a former UN staff member with experience, like was, of course, Victor, as you noticed before, and Frank and others.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I wasn't able to participate in the whole meeting because today is a work day, but I'm very interested in participating given the situation. And I'd just like to say that I'm speaking in my personal capacity because I'm working presently, so this doesn't represent my institution. What I would like to say is that it's actually a story that happened recently. I went to Daughter's University in Connecticut, and the incoming president, and this is Yale, said that she would take a neutral position. It was her induction ceremony, and that Yale would not have a position on anything related to global affairs. I thought that was a very sad statement because who are we looking up to? Like, who is going to take us out of the conundrum if it's not for the academic institutions that have the best minds to contribute to thinking through this in an enlightened way? And Yale's motto is truth and veritas, truth and light. And what about truth and light not being shed or spoken about and just being neutrally muted? How about that? I thought that was shocking, and sometimes silence speaks more, loudly than words. And what I'd like to say is the middle countries have an enormous amount of academic knowledge and prestigious institutions that could fill that void. I know that Mexico has an incredible university, Brazil has incredible universities, Colombia, Chile, so many of the Latin American countries, and I know Egypt does, India does. What about these academic institutions rise to the occasion and speak, truth to power in ways that maybe political governments cannot? But they can influence the debate, they can write articles, they can contribute to the discussion and exercise leadership that we're not seeing anywhere. And I think that, and global institutions have academic institutions have sometimes participated in global negotiations as delegates because of their knowledge. I think it would be a welcome thing if, the middle income countries would invite their academic institutions to speak at UN events and meetings to provide their perspective. And I think that would be an added value. And what we need here is really leadership, clarity of vision, speaking about values, and not being afraid to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula, and for pointing out the need for leadership and not self-censorship of the intellectuals, right? The academic institutions and middle powers in developing countries. So we have also a lot of them. Yes, and we're trying to create also a network of think tanks from around the world and the South, Selene and others here. Thank you. I think we're getting there also. It's coming together, and something will happen on that front too. Thank you. Suki, you probably are the last speaker because we have also gone beyond our time already. And thank you for staying with us throughout, despite the late hour. And everybody
Well, thank you. I'll make it just 1 minute. Thank you, Georgios. Thank you for this invitation. Also, I'd like to thank, in particular, last two speakers, Paula and Jerry Jacobson, for the importance of support to the institution, and I'd like to thank the Netherlands for hosting all this ICC, ICJ, and other judicial organs of UN system. And I'd like to thank Africans, South Africa in particular, for bringing to the attention of ICC, all these people that they have indicted. And I'd like to just share with you one concern that the judge Akane-san, she's a Japanese, she's a head of ICC, and she is not at all protected in The Hague. Wherever she goes, and so forth. And we are a bit worried about it because there is a certain hostility to her. Japan is the biggest contributor to ICC. And as a middle power, maybe Japan can do what it can do best. So thank you. for bringing also my participation in this reality. Thanks, Georgia.
Thank you, Suki, and everybody else who spoke. Really, thanks a lot. It took us longer than expected or planned, but we could go on for much longer also. I think there is a great community or a meeting of minds eventually in terms of the important role of middle powers, however we define them, the important role that they can have in supporting institutions like the United Nations, in let's say reviving ways of like peacekeeping and other things that have come to disrepute or are not used anymore, but also other actors, the civil society, pay attention to the media, the private sector, bring in, let's say, create this coalescence of powers and approaches that will start to change things, will show the big powers that there is something more, there is a core that is based on values, there is a core that knows that their interest is in functioning institutions and principles, and it's not a free-for-all, and sometimes it seems today. And I think that would also give hope to younger people. We heard from them who want to live a better future and to contribute to that. So anyway, it's not like a summary. We'll produce the key points of the discussion in a few days' time, and we hope to have you in our next meeting, Monday, where we will discuss on the 5th of May a new narrative for peace and resilience. Basically, all this that we've been discussing specifically for conflicts or now for middle powers, how we can make it a coherent story that can empower middle powers, other actors, people, individuals to act and to have a positive vision for the future and really work on achieving it. So thank you very much. And whatever each one of us can do, stay in touch also and to do things together. Thank you.